Welcome to MentorTime. This is a topic I talk about frequently with mentees in individual and sometimes in review meetings. I'm talking about it in MentorTime, about how you can value your worth, valuing your worth through verbal self-reflection. Here's the aha moment. Those of you who know me well know I have a mirror. You need to use a mirror to help you show your value. And we'll uncover that as we go through, that the opportunity we all have is to move forward on how and in what way we discover some of the things that make us unique that we didn't realize about ourselves. Here's the thing that I hear all the time, even when I first started talking about verbal self-reflection. I didn't necessarily call it that, but I would say to them, this is something you're saying to me, or this is what I'm hearing. Or most of the time when I talk about it, people think I'm talking about journaling. Isn't that the same thing? It never was for me, but some people do journal and like to journal, but it's not the same thing. And you'll see about the science in it when we move a little farther forward. I also hear that people say, Sue, I don't have a mentor. Can I just talk about it out loud? And that does help a little bit, as we'll hear, but it's not the whole thing. And this is a big one I run into quite often, especially with people who are young professionals who tell me, in my culture, I was raised to be humble. My family doesn't want me to brag. How can I stop underselling myself? At least they know they're underselling themselves. So here's how we'll get there today. First, we're going to talk about why verbalize. I'm going to take you into neuroscience and then move on to how does this actually happen. And since I know each of you who are here live, and if you're watching in replay and have worked with Ron and me, you may recall moments this happened for you. And at the end, we'll talk about what should you do to value your worth. So let's get started with why verbalize. I finally went through and looked at the literature. I had looked at this a few years ago, of which there is almost none on verbal self-reflection, but there is a lot on what's called self-reflection, primarily in psychology, but it's also in education. And in fact, I first came across the relationship of what I was doing, what I do in the short course that you all have taken, is a lot of what Sheila Robinson calls self-reflective practice. It's a known way. She teaches a lot about it. And she's taught me a lot about self-reflective practice, and that's some of what you do when you do the work in each step. This is from a fairly recent article where it described self-reflection. And it's basically, as you might think, how people view themselves, appraise, judge themselves. Most everything I found talked about self-reflection, even when I told Perplexity it must have the term verbal self-reflection somewhere in there. I got one article that talked about this, and this was actually more of a psychology measurement paper, but it talked about the difference, and you can see this reminds you of statistics, self-concept, valence, and coherence, the things that are factors that we used to put together. They talked about engaging in verbal self-reflection for a few minutes, but they never defined it and never described anything more than that, just assuming that people would understand that they're doing, maybe taking their own self-value judgments from thinking it internally to moving on verbally. And what I did get to then, this research paper, Alain Morin, this and the next article, he's the author in both of these, they talk about using what they call self-talk. And it's a phenomenon that's, again, studied in psychology. Talking out loud or talking in silence. But the talking out loud is usually negative or positive, berating yourself or giving yourself affirmations. It's not what I was looking for in terms of what I call verbal self-reflection. But this did lead me to how they describe the internal chatter. And you may recall I've done this quite often. I talk about you have all this chatter back here in your head. I know it's not anatomically correct for those who know I'm a healthcare provider. But when it comes through your mouth, it comes out differently, and you have those aha moments, is what I've always said. So I was happy to see this, but saying it out loud is not what did not wasn't congruent with their definition of appraising, evaluating, judging. But the term self-talk, again, Alain Morin, the first author on this paper, talked about the fact that humans and language offers a major advantage for the human self-reflection. And for me, that link to language is the link to what I call verbal self-reflection. Again, these are now going on probably 6 to 7 years of self-reflective, verbal self-reflection through my empiric and my anecdotal observations. So let's talk about how it happens, first with a definition. I'm curious if any of you want to unmute and take a stab at defining it or put it in the chat. Either way, I'm going to give you a definition right after this, but if anybody wants to take a try at it, you don't have a lot of competition. You saw how little's in the literature out there, so please feel free to unmute and say something. Anyone? Every time I say that a second time, I feel like Ferris Bueller. So
you're trying to push for something. For me, it's funny because I've been thinking about this idea is that the verbal self-reflection, it's actually speaking out loud. And so you have the self-talk, and part of the challenge, I think, like you said, is sometimes it's what you're thinking isn't what you end up saying. And so I just think about how many times when you and I have been in a meeting and we hear somebody verbalize something and they're trying to work something out, and then you and I will then say, oh, go back and listen to the recording to hear what you said. And so I think in part, that's part of it too, is actually hearing yourself. And I think sometimes when we verbalize, we actually don't hear what we're saying. And so I think the perfect example would be verbalizing your ideas and then actually somehow hearing them back.
Excellent. And guess what? Ron is not a plant for the next couple slides. It's very close to what you said. So here's the definition I came up with. Again, this helped me organize and put my thoughts together doing this presentation. It's definitely a two-way interaction. It's not the definition we saw in psychology where it's either talking out loud or silent to yourself, saying things about yourself. So it's between, for example, mentor, mentee, coach, coachee, could be between Ron and me. Ron, you've caused some of my aha moments, and I know vice versa. But during which a key breakthrough statement comes from the mentee. That's the important thing. It's that the information, and I always say this, is you all have it in you. The information and the statements are coming from you. But it gives you insight and realization in a way that you could make a plan, move forward, you can see the value in it. So there's a key piece here that I didn't exactly break down, and I want to show you what it looks like. I do almost all the work I do virtually with all of you. This is Busayo, who's a very well-known woman in Nigeria who I was paired up with years ago, and we met a year ago and said hello together. You all recognize probably I hold up my blue mirror. I won't hold it up. We don't need duplicate mirrors here today, because it's discussions and questions specifically about the mentee, in this case, Busayo, and that helps the brain organize a response. It's also facilitated by the fact that we have a relationship that has trust of some level in it, that's a safe space. You all tell me you feel comfortable, for example, in review meetings, and it is part of the process. And here's where you see it in two ways, and Ron alluded to both of these. The mentee realizes this is very stilted language. I couldn't get it. I was trying not to use a lot of pronouns and him and her and whatever. But when you say something as the person who's being helped, you realize the value of an effort or solution as you're talking about it. You suddenly say, oh, that's the words that come out. And you think, wow, where'd that come from? Sometimes it's the mentor hearing you talk, and this also Ron referred to, is Ron and me reflecting back an interpretation of what we heard A lot of times I'll reframe something. There's one of you on here who was consistently underselling herself because I've known her for more than 20 years. And when we first started working together in the course, I said, but what about this and what about that? And you're a very well-known editor and writer. So it's the talking that organizes it. And this is where I finally landed on at least a tentative connection, I'm claiming, from neuroscience to this verbal self-reflection, because I asked Perplexity to put in sixth grader language, six, so not fourth grader or third grader, but enough to have concepts about thinking, to tell me in sixth grader language the neuroscience between how our brain processes a whole lot of jumbled and various information to make it come out of our mouth in a sentence that we don't even think about. We say things without thinking about it. So this is the neuroscience description. And if you go to this blog, there's a nice discussion. It doesn't say exactly, this is a summary of what it talks about, but it talks about the fact that your brain has all these different parts that organize what all of the pieces in, even things like knowing that your culture raised you to be humble and not brag, that would be in there even if you weren't thinking about it. And then you end up saying something. The sentence that you put out usually makes sense. It's not usually garbled. It usually makes sense. And that, for me, is where you now have the necessity to have a partner. So can you say it out loud by yourself? We'll talk about that in a few minutes, but spoiler alert, I don't think so. I think having the other person to talk to in some fashion, usually synchronously, will give you those aha moments. So here's what I want to know. Given the definition, given the way I've explained it about how the brain basically acts like a filtering and organizing and funneling thing to get us to say something, have you done it? If you've done it, I'd be happy hearing about it. We'll be talking about it again. But have you done verbal self-reflection? And remember, I know all of you very well. So if you just want to put in the chat yes or no, that's fine. I won't call anybody out. Ron says he has. I have too. I told you Ron often helps me with that. So do mentees as well. All of you have. Peter says he has. Great. All right. I will let others finish typing, or as I said, I think Sheila's probably traveling home. So let's move on to the what do you do now to value your worth? I thought a lot about this and how and in what way I can have you take some advice forward. But just a reminder, this was the best graphic I could find of how we'd taken all this information. The idea thing was there. I made the lips and put in the aha insight because it's really that insights happen more than you realize. And that's one of the things that I want to remind you all of. How and in what way do you know where yours came from? Do we think we can do this by ourselves? No. I think you really do need a mirror because that verbalization causes things to come out differently. Here, thank you, Sheila, for that comment. Here are some of what I hear from you and others. I see now that I can tell my colleagues about my award, that it's a reflection of the hard work I've done in graduate school, and I won't be bragging. That was someone, again, these are paraphrased. I don't remember exactly what they said a year or two ago. But that person who was fighting against culture and how she was raised found a way to celebrate and at least acknowledge a very nice award she was given. This person was in a review meeting. No, sorry, this person was in live teaching that I was doing a year ago and said, when I was talking about intellectual property, we were talking about what that person had done. And as we got deeper into, could you talk about school projects and data sets? And I said, yes. And then someone piped up and said, oh, I didn't know the Excel database that I created a few years ago could show that I anticipated needs and made our company more efficient from this tool. So it wasn't that they didn't know that the work was done, they didn't know how to value it and didn't have the ability to even ask about it because they didn't know it was valuable. And this is often what I see, partially looking in the mirror, meaning you're finally seeing what's coming back. This person was introducing herself. We were just starting mentoring. And she said, wow, when I said what I do, I realized how it's much less than my actual role. So she didn't even need me to tell her she was underselling herself. She realized it just by saying it. And here's two ways for those of us that do it more in less informal courses or in mentoring. Brenda Meller organized this Detroit in-person event when I was flying up there in July. And Brenda and I were in a planning call, and I was thinking, what am I going to tell her? I don't know about marketing and mentoring, or I didn't even know how to frame it. And then she called on me and said, Sue, what do you want to talk about? And I don't know where it came out of my brain, other than knowing that I've been thinking for a long time about people who job search are also self-employed because you've got to make money and balance your own business. But I said, I'm going to talk about unexpectedly self-employed people, as job seekers often are. The second way was someone who reflected back to me, and Emery is a colleague and a friend now. We were on the call in 2022, and I was talking to her about various aspects of the business of Sue Mentors and the course and MentorTime and all of this. And she said to me, Sue, stop saying that you don't have a brand. She said, pom-poms are your brand. And I'd been using the pom-poms and the Mentor with pom-poms for at least 2 years before that. Never even dawned on me. And then immediately I made my own logo out of some different icons I put together. And she said, just lean into it. That's your brand. So here's what I want you all to think about. Now, this will be more in retrospect. It has to be in retrospect. But when I asked you about doing verbal self-reflection, you said yes, you've done some aspects of that. Some of you were not very specific, but that's fine. What I want you to do is think about mirror interactions, meaning those where you're talking to someone and you or the other person has helped you realize, oh, that might be about my work generally. Something important, for example, even I couldn't find a better word than either secret sauce or X factor, both of which are really not a good global term to use. But what makes you different? What is it you bring that someone said to you, this is so important because it helped me, blah, 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 or it communicates this way. Things that you do, methods and tools. And I know with one of you on here, as you were changing jobs, I asked you to document all the work you'd done in your regional job because I felt like you had an approach, as little as I knew about it from working with you, you had an approach that was going to be able to be portable and transportable outside of the region you were working in. And in fact, that's true for you still. I don't know that I was the first person that said it to you, but I know we talked about it, and your comment was something like, oh, that's a good point. Not really thinking of yourself in that way. Again, I'm going back now 4 years, maybe 5. So as we finish up, I just want to ask you, for those who said they did some kind of verbal self-reflection, I'm being very broad in this. You don't have to stick to a definition. I just wrote something down so I could explain it to you. But how have you claimed your credit since you did that? What was there one thing that you said, oh, this was really important, like my friend Ann Emery, who said something to me, or Ron, who kept saying to me when we were first starting the course about the relationship of the biopara. He didn't call it an appetizer, but he said your goal is to get the appetizer and get them to read and then get you in for an interview. And he drew he had a nice little diagram way back when we first met and were working in another program together. So either right in the chat, or if someone wants to unmute, I'd love to hear about it. If anybody has something they want to talk about claiming your credit, because this is all about giving you the opportunity to continue to value your worth. No one? Oh, that's fine. Sheila, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I think when it comes to claiming credit, culture, I would say, plays a big role. So, for example, in many parts of Africa, we are told, so for example, looking someone directly in the eyes is a sign of arrogance. So you look down when speaking to someone your senior. And then how I would phrase it in this sense is that maybe in some sense, and I've definitely felt this, claiming your credit seems like something obvious that you're supposed to do. It's not necessarily something you should brag about or claim it. And this is where I love my West African friends, Nigerians, because they will say every little thing they did and say it out loud, and it makes the rest of us Africans look small. But in this sense, it does make sense because it's actually something that you did that you should be credited for. And so it's taking pride in what you did and not having to look at yourself like you did not do enough. And I'm definitely trying to incorporate that in updating my CV and my work portfolio. Yeah, culture, I think there's a bit of unlearning that needs to be done, and recognizing that what you do, you may see it as something small or obvious, or something that this is routine for you. There's no need to talk about it, but actually talking about it proves your credit or your worth in some way. It should not be overlooked. Yeah.
That's great. And I will give you huge kudos for your work on your Notion portfolio before anybody else did it. Before we even talked about a career portfolio, what was it, almost 2 years ago now, you decided to do that and said, when we were talking about it, you said, oh, Sue, I've actually done something like that. It was great. So as you were talking, I was back in Kenya, and I haven't been in Nigeria, but I've worked with a lot of Nigerians, and I could picture the people, this and this. But you're not the only cultures that are told to be respectful in that way. I have people that will never call me anything but Dr. Griffey because I'm older, and in their country and culture in Asia, they would, no matter how long I've known them, they still call me, if they abbreviate anything, it's at least Dr. Sue. If I can get him down to Dr. Sue, I feel comfortable with that. All right, I will just thank everybody for that and say, really, part of the additional help you can get is to use a mirror to help show you your value. And I would say this is continual. It's not something that comes just in the course or just in mentor time, like we often have discussions. So I want to turn this over to Ron, because I'm sure that he has a lot of value he will provide us as well.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're talking about here is the idea of this self-reflection and so on. And it reminded me, there's some work that was done in the military years and years ago about self-evaluation. And so it's this business of why you don't do this on your own without a safety net or something, is that they did some studies about how people tend to self-evaluate. And they found there were some people who consistently overestimated what they were doing. And then they have others who are consistently underestimating. And so you have these kind of and then there's people who have a reasonable understanding of their own worth, self-value. So it is a bit of a challenge. And I think this is one of the values of having somebody to reflect with you so that you aren't just driving on your own. And so, as you can imagine, those people who have an overestimation of themselves are a bigger challenge than those who underestimate. And the underestimators, I think the big issue has to do with, and I think, Sue, you and I on our sessions often encounter people who don't fully credit themselves for the accomplishments that they've done. And For us, those people are wonderful to work with because helping with the insights and so on, it's just amazing to watch the ahas when people all of a sudden, oh yeah, okay, that, and oh yeah, I didn't, and that kind of dialogue with us, with themselves, is very interesting. And we're fortunate so far. I don't think we've really encountered too many overestimators, but they can be an exceptional challenge. And I do recall once having a student when I was in the UK of an overestimator. And my conclusion to the course leader was, we got to fail that guy. And I was informed we couldn't. And I said, what do you mean we can't? He says, he's the head of the department. And so we can't fail him. And I said, oh, you guys are all messed up. And so I would done. It's an interesting challenge, but I think I would rather work with somebody who misses their value to help them recover it and to examine it and to restate it so that it can be understood by others and actually by themselves. I think that's part of it, is understanding for yourself what that value is. And so I think it's just lovely. So thank you, Sue, for this.
You're welcome. I'm going to open the floor for comments, questions, opposing theories, which is fine with me. I admit it's a tenuous taking some of the psychology literature and saying this is why I think verbalizing is so important. But I believe that the place that it occurs in sessions like this are the things that are the reason that asynchronous courses by themselves don't help a lot of people, because what they want is they'll do the work as you all did in the course, but you want some personal interaction that helps you move along. And that's what I think we are happy about. I'm happy about in COVID, that I can reach so many more people with video, which I couldn't do before. I could barely do Skype phone calls. So anybody want to say anything else? I appreciate, Sheila, your experience. It just reminds me of what everybody deals with in situations of how they're raised and where we go. Mary, sure, go ahead.
Yep. Ron's comments reminded me of the stats that I've seen about when people go to apply for jobs, and how I'm pretty sure, and I'm not going to remember the stats, but just that a larger percentage of men who don't have the qualifications will end up applying for a job before a woman would. So that's what came to mind, and it seems to tie in too with that self-reflection as well of what a person is capable of doing.
I love that. I know exactly the studies you're talking about. They're the same ones that will, I'm going to get this not totally correct, but this was a study done probably 10 or 12 years ago, where at the junior level, men were as likely as women to ask for help or to want mentoring or have mind programs or whatever companies were offering. But by the time that they got to mid-level, they were already like, don't bother me with this. I have no time for it. And it was primarily women who took advantage of those programs.
Yeah.
It's very hard to get a sense on that now in the virtual world. I can tell you that the average for us in the short course is maybe we might be at about 5% men who sign up and very few who complete it, very few who even get to step one. So it's mostly women, but it's also conflated with me being a woman and being known for global work. And so I never know how it lands. I get a lot of people from Africa, Asia, fewer from Latin America, and a lot from the US and Europe, but the men don't necessarily continue through. Now, I know that there's male-oriented coaching and mentoring programs for professional development, and they're probably overrepresented with men. Who knows? It's definitely chemistry. I say all the time, I'm not everyone's type. I know that. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Mary, because I think that Ron was alluding to something that I've had occasional challenges in the course with people come into the course, and at step 2 they send me their old CV or their old resume, don't do any of the work, and I have to figure out politely how to say, haven't seen the learnings on writing evidence-based results would welcome you doing it, and then usually it's the end. If someone's a very desperate and interested attendee and has been engaged somewhat, I give them a little more of a pass. But by step 3, if they're still using old language like responsible for this and passionate about that, I just do the best I can to say, I can't really review this. So it's a challenge. And I think, Ron, you're right. I think overestimators are probably more likely to be more senior, but I think that's probably starting to change as the dynamics of the workplace are changing. Again, who knows with big
Yeah, I
companies
think
that are still being led by older men,
Amen.
older senior men. I hope to live long enough to see that change a lot.
Yeah, I think that in part what you're saying, see, for me, my understanding of the stats is that the males tend to be more overestimators. These are generalization, not every
Yeah.
man, but the idea is you're more likely to see it there. And then conversely, women tend to be underestimators. And those are broad generalizations. But I think you're probably right. As women continue to represent middle and upper management in business, perhaps things will improve. Because I think you're right. You get these old fogies who know everything and they know nothing at the same time, but they're going to do it their way anyway. And you get that, and that's part of the challenge. But I think the glass ceiling has been breaking for some time. There are still pieces of it up there, and it's a challenge. And having seen it through the military and watched as women more and more represented in higher leadership roles, it's a delight to see what it does and the type of things that you'll see. And then there's the occasional catastrophe, but that's usually something else completely. And I'll sometimes, Sue, I'll share with you some of the catastrophes. I won't do it here.
I can only imagine, like any job, but military, definitely, I'm sure.
Yeah, the military has some examples like, wow.
Yeah. Any last comments? Any last thoughts? Again, it was interesting for me to be able to put together something that I've been doing intuitively and feeling like it provides value that isn't talked about a lot. Yay me. I love that it's all people I know who know me. Let me do that. I don't see anybody unmuting. Ron, I'm going to go to the next screen where there are references, and I'll ask Ron to close the meeting, please.
Yeah, thanks everyone for being part of this. It's always a delight to get your input. And so there's a fair amount of input here today. And so thank you for that. And I'm not 100% sure when our next session is, Sue. It's in November, obviously.
Yeah, I think it should be 2 weeks from now. It's just
That's what I was
it's my
thinking.
birthday week. It must be the 10th.
Yeah, because the next week it's a travel week for me. I'm heading off to
Right.
Mexico.
You're off. Is it 5, 6, or 6, 7? You're off.
Five, and 6. I'm unavailable because preparation of the house and then traveling.
All right. So we'll see you all in 2 weeks. Take care and have a good
Yeah.
weekend.